All right, week two, Minnesota Vikings will be hosting the Indianapolis Colts for week two of the preseason. And today we'll be previewing this episode. This is a game that will be airing on ABC, CBS, and Fox on Saturday, 7 p.m. Central Time. So, a quick injury report before we get into this. Kene Nwanu will not play in this game. Prior to the preseason, I was saying how the Minnesota Vikings, our breakout player will be Kene Nwanu. He will be our player that will really win us some games, and he was injured on the kickoff of last week's game. So he will likely not play until week one of the NFL season, which is exactly what we don't need right now. With Dalvin Cook's injuries, he's been injured every year. Alexander Mattison has been injured every year. Now we have Kene Nwanu, who should be our running back 3, and is also being injured right off the bat. So big role for AJ Rose and Amir Abdullah to fill, because these are our 2 running backs right now. Our 3 best running backs, in my opinion, are all out right now. And well, Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison, they will play in this game, but very limited snaps, because you do not want to risk those 2 players being injured. So we will likely see more of AJ Rose and Amir Abdullah splitting snaps on offense. And then Anthony Barr is also questionable to play during this game with an unknown injury. Anthony Barr has not practiced since August 5th. So I'm assuming that this unknown injury is more serious than any of us even know that it is. So I'm guessing that he won't play in this game, but he is also questionable to play. Justin Jefferson, shoulder injury, something we've been hearing a lot of, is questionable to play on Saturday, and he will play, but it'll be very limited snaps. Obviously, the Vikings don't need to risk Justin Jefferson getting injured too. He's one of our best players in offense, but you want to warm him up for the season because he's going to be playing a lot. He will be our wide receiver 1 in this season, so you want him to play in preseason to really warm him up. You want to give him some reps. With that being said, though, he's going to be very limited and will likely not see as many snaps as other wide receivers will. Tyler Conklin is also questionable to play with a hamstring injury. He'll likely play. I mean, Tyler Conklin, Vikings should play, and they shouldn't have sat him last week, as Tyler Conklin has a big role to fill this upcoming season. He was a tight end 3 all of his year so far, and then now with Kyle Rudolph moving on and Irv Smith Jr. being our tight end number 1, Tyler Conklin has a big role to play as a tight end alongside him, because the Vikings love to run those 2 tight end sets, especially if Kellen Mond is going to be our quarterback, who loves to use those tight ends, and he used them all the time in Texas A&M. He will use those tight ends. So Tyler Conklin has a big role to play, and hopefully he will be healthy, and this hamstring injury is just a minor thing, and he will likely be healthy this Saturday to play. James Lynch, also unknown injury, but he is also likely to play this Saturday. James Lynch, another player who we've been loving. Outside of that, Cameron Smith will not be playing. Another player how I've been very excited to watch. Cameron Smith has retired, which came out of nowhere. I mean, Cameron Smith missed last year with the open heart surgery. He just got a concussion in practice, and then he's retiring after all these injuries. And you hate to see it, because he did have a lot of potential. Vikings drafted him in the 5th round, and the limited time we did get to see of Cameron Smith, you saw his potential, and I was excited to see what he could do this preseason. And week 1, we didn't get to see very much from him, but I wanted to see more week 2 and 3. But without Cameron Smith, that's kind of a loss, because Vikings are really struggling at the linebacker position right now. So if you take a look at this Vikings offense that we're going to see against the Colts, Kellen Mond should play a majority of the snaps. Now, I don't care what anyone says. Kellen Mond is our backup quarterback. He is our quarterback number 2. Going into the preseason, a lot of people were saying that it's going to be Jake Browning, and I mean, no one was saying Nate Stanley, but a lot of people were saying that it would be Jake Browning, because he did play a lot in training camp. And while that makes sense right now, after we saw what Jake Browning did last week, where he had an awful performance, Kellen Mond didn't have much better of a performance, but he was drafted in the 3rd round to be the backup quarterback. And that's why we should see a lot of him week 2 against the Colts. And hopefully, he can make a lot of plays with his legs, because that is really what I'm excited to see, and can hit his wide receivers on his second read, because he was really struggling with reads. Outside of that, AJ Rose should be our starting running back. You don't want to risk Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison getting injured, which is why you want to give them some reps, because you want them to warm up for the season, but you don't want, I mean, it's Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison. They get injured all the time. You want to limit them during the game. So I would expect to see a lot of AJ Rose, and should be our starting running back. And then our starting fullback, Jake Vargas, another player. Jake Vargas was kind of that light shine last week, because every time he was out there, he was making plays. He had amazing blocks. He even had some receptions. Jake Vargas is a good player to have on your practice squad, because when CJ Ham goes down, CJ Ham's my favorite Vikings, and that little X factor on the Vikings offense. If he does go down with the injury like he did last year, Jake Vargas can step into that role like we did see last year during the season. And then wide receiver, really anybody. I mean, I want to see every Vikings wide receiver on the depth chart play on Saturday. At the tight end position, I want to see Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin both start. Now, yes, last week we did get to see some of Brandon Dillon, Shane Zylstra. I can't remember the name of the rookie that the Vikings drafted. They drafted Zach Davidson. That was his name. We did get to see some of these players. We also, Zach Davidson, the rookie tight end that the Minnesota Vikings drafted in the 5th round, I believe it was. We got to see him punt too. Did an okay job. He's going to be our backup punter, maybe starting punter, because Britton Colquitt didn't look very good as well. So if he can be both a punter and a tight end and take up basically two positions and one roster spot, amazing for him. But anyways, he's nothing compared to Tyler Conklin and Irv Smith Jr., as that tight end duo might be one of the best in the NFL. And I would like to see both of them start this game against the Colts, because Kellen Mond loves to use his tight ends, and really they could both have a field day against this Colts defense, which is a very good defense, by the way. They do have Holton Hill, one of our Vikings corners who started the 2020 season. This was mostly because Cameron Dantzler and Jeff Gladney were both rookies who didn't get to play any preseason games because there was no preseason games. We got to see Holton Hill start a little bit, and then the Vikings cut him because he really did nothing for our defense. He's also there. We'll see a lot of Holton Hill, obviously, because he's going to be like cornerback number 6 on their depth chart. They also have this rookie that they drafted in the 1st round. So Colts have an excellent defense and a lot of depth. So at the linebacker position, not really, which is why the tight ends could both get over 100 yards receiving if the Vikings wanted to. But again, they're going to not just have Tyler Conklin and Irv Smith Jr. hog up all the reps. If they did, they could both get over 100 yards receivings, because these linebacker depth that the Colts have is not as good as their secondary depth, is what I'm saying here, or their defensive line. With that being said, looking back on the offensive line, I want to see a starting offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings, because last week there was no reason why the Vikings should have benched a lot of these players. The only offensive lineman on the Vikings offensive line that deserved to be benched last week was Brian O'Neill, because he's the only great player on this Vikings offensive line. The rest of them, Oli Uda never played a snap at right guard or at guard in general, and the Vikings decided to bench him. Ezra Cleveland, obviously second-year player, has never played a snap at left guard. You don't need to bench him as well. Rashad Hill, he's a backup left tackle and going to possibly be a starting left tackle. You know, they could have benched him if they wanted to, whatever. And then Garrett Bradbury, still, he's a pretty good center when you look at it as a whole. He's not great, but he's not 1st-round draft pick talent, which he was drafted in the 1st round, but he's a solid center. I mean, he's had some excellent blocks for Dalvin Cook and has led to some of the best Dalvin Cook runs in his highlight tape. So Garrett Bradbury, hats off to him for blocking for Dalvin Cook. When it comes to protecting for Kirk Cousins, has not done a great job though. But anyways, I want to see the entire offensive line that the Vikings plan on start on Saturday against the Indianapolis Colts. I'll read off the offensive line right now. I want to see left tackle Rashad Hill or Christian Darrisaw start. One of the two. Whoever looks better in practice. I don't care that Christian Darrisaw was a 1st-round draft pick. Whoever looks better in practice, start them at left tackle. If it is Rashad Hill. Now, yes, Rashad Hill is not a 1st-round draft pick. He doesn't have the name that Christian Darrisaw has, and I understand why a lot of Vikings fans want to see Darrisaw start week 1. Whoever looks better, just start them. It doesn't matter where their draft pick was. So if Rashad Hill is looking better, start him at left tackle. And then Ezra Cleveland at left guard. No question. He's going to start at left guard. Center, Garrett Bradbury. Obviously, he's going to start at center, but you also want to see some of this Cole Cabrel, Mason Cole. You want to see these players play at center as well. Right guard, either Wyatt Davis or Oli Uda could both work at the right guard position. I don't want to see any of Dakota Dozier. No Drew Samia. I'd rather see Kyle Hinton and some other no-name guys that we drafted or took in free agency start over Ezra Cleveland, or start over Dakota Dozier and Drew Samia, because both those guards are awful. And then right tackle, obviously Brian O'Neill, Blake Brandel, whoever you want to start there as well. With that being said, though, that basically covers the Vikings offensive line right there, and we need to see all of these players play, especially on the offensive line, because Vikings have to build that chemistry for the season. Vikings allowed far too many pressures last year on Kirk Cousins. The Vikings offensive line needs to build chemistry in the preseason to prepare for the regular season. The Vikings can't go week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, their defensive line is not great. They can't go week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals after sitting all of their offensive linemen. because there's no chemistry there, especially with some of these players who's never played on at their current position, like our two guards, Ezra Cleveland and Oli Udoh. Now, taking a look at our defense, Vikings don't need to play really any of our veteran players. They will to give them some reps, but a lot of these veteran players really don't need to play. I mean, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, Patrick Peterson, Harrison Smith, Xavier Woods, who was the guy that we took, Brashad Breeland, Mackenzie Alexander, or really anybody on the defensive line as well. Vikings don't need to play much of any of those players. They'll play some of it, obviously, to give them some reps, but you don't need to see a lot from these veterans. With that being said, though, at the cornerback position, it's going to be interesting to see Chris Boyd versus Cameron Dantzler. Cameron Dantzler is the player for the Vikings who's a very undersized corner. Vikings drafted in the 3rd round out of Mississippi State in the 2020 draft. We need to see a lot more from him. He had a terrible week last week and should be our cornerback 1 in preseason to really try to earn that role to possibly be a starting corner week 1 against the Bengals. We also want to see more of Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd had an excellent week last week and was our 7th round draft pick in 2019 and has really worked his way up the depth chart and could possibly be our cornerback 2 going into the 2022 season. So he's really worked his way up, and I'm happy to see what Chris Boyd is doing. Stephen Weatherly and DJ Wanham both at defensive end. Really playing for that starting defensive end role because it's up for a toss right now. Danielle Hunter, one of the best defensive ends in the NFL. Outside of that, we need someone to really start alongside him who can get at least 4 sacks. That's what we're asking for. 4 sacks in the first half of the season. So Stephen Weatherly and DJ Wanham are both playing for that role right now. You also have Patrick Jones, Hercules Mataafa, Janarius Robinson, and Jalen Holmes, who's not going to get it. And then at the linebacker position, you can just play everybody. I want to see all these linebackers because, again, this is another spot where it is a toss-up. Right now, Anthony Barr is looking at his last season with the Vikings. Eric Kendricks has that middle linebacker role locked down. He's the best middle linebacker in the NFL. It's really the outside linebackers that I'm focusing on here. But Troy Dye could really make a splash as a middle linebacker and could be a solid backup to Eric Kendricks if he does get injured again. I would like to see more of these players playing safety because the safety position last week really led to a lot of deep plays that ruined our entire game. I mean, I do want to see more of Josh Metellus. I need him to earn his roster spot. Cam Bynum, obviously draft pick. You want to give him some reps. And then you can also play Xavier Woods and Harrison Smith if you'd like. So that really takes a look at our entire depth chart on how we will see these Vikings players play and really who to focus on. I'm mostly focusing on the defensive end position, wide receiver, and really watching what all these players can do because they need to earn that spot. And the offensive line. Offensive line looks terrible, and we need to play our starting offensive line to really build some chemistry for the season. So when you take a look at the Indianapolis Colts, now during the regular season, we're going to be looking a lot more into our opponents. Right now, I mean, the score doesn't really matter because we're going to be focusing on our own team because you really want to see what these teams can do. But when you do take a look at the Indianapolis Colts, they have a lot of depth on their secondary and their skilled positions, especially the running back group. They might have the best running back group in the NFL. I mean, no, they can't. They can't have a better running back group than the Minnesota Vikings, though, because they don't have that star running back. Now, Jonathan Taylor can be a star running back this upcoming season, but he's nowhere near, I mean, Dalvin Cook and some of these players. So they have the best running back depth in the NFL is what I'll say here. So we're going to see a lot of running backs run through this Vikings team. It'll really question how we can perform against the run because we should be a lot better than we were last year. And then also at the skilled positions, they have a lot of depth. Jacob Easton will be starting for the Indianapolis Colts. He is their 2024 round draft pick and had an excellent performance last week. And I believe it was like a 92 PFF grade. So he can definitely do that against the Minnesota Vikings secondary as well. So Vikings just really need to target those linebackers. They don't have a lot of depth at the linebacker position, even though they have one of the best linebacker groups when it comes to starters in the NFL. They don't have a whole lot of depth at that position. Now to make our predictions for the game, Kellen Mond will be our starting quarterback and will play a majority of the snaps on offense. I believe he will have 19 completions with a 54 completion percentage, which isn't great, but is acceptable with 264 passing yards, as well as 6 rushing attempts with 33 rushing yards and 2 total touchdowns. I don't know if those touchdowns will both be passing or one will be passing, one will be rushing, or both will be rushing, but either way, I believe he'll have 2 touchdowns. AJ Rose will have 20 rushing yards or 20 rushing attempts for 80 yards, which will average at, I believe that's 4 yards per carry, 2 receptions for 14 yards and a touchdown. And our receiving yard leader will be Dan Chisena. I've talked about him a little bit here, but I think on offense, Vikings should use him a lot more at wide receiver because our wide receivers last year that the Vikings were using don't deserve to get more reps than they did last week. KJ Osborne, Amir Smith-Marset, these players didn't look great last week. And that's why I believe Vikings will be looking to Dan Chisena and D.D. Westbrook and really see what these players can do, assuming D.D. Westbrook will be healthy this week. Dan Chisena will have 4 receptions for 80 yards, and the Vikings will win 24-23 over the Indianapolis Colts for a home game victory, week 2 preseason, and then go on to play Kansas City Chiefs week 3 in Kansas City. So this is my predictions, my preview for this game. Vikings really do need to target those tight ends because they will have a big role to fill. Vikings love to run those 2 tight end sets, and Clint Kubiak has really learned under Kevin Stefanski. Now, Kevin Stefanski is a great head coach, but as an offensive coordinator, did a great job with the Vikings, and Clint Kubiak has learned under him. And one thing we know about Kevin Stefanski is that he loved to run those 2 tight end sets. Now, Clint Kubiak is going to run a similar offense to that. So assuming we will see a lot of 2 tight end sets and play action passes and the fullback with a halfback with the tailback in the backfield. So that's really an offense how we're going to assume to see. Not a whole lot of slot wide receivers this year, but I think that's totally fine with the Vikings because our offense is centered around Dalvin Cook. It's centered around the run. We use the run we establish the run to set up the pass. And this is really how we're going to see this offense built, which we're fine with not having a star wide receiver 3 because we're not going to see a whole lot of wide receiver 3 action this upcoming season. So let me know what you guys think. How do you think this game will go? And what are your predictions for the Vikings week 2 game against the Indianapolis Colts?